Brains in Motion with Mary McKone, EdD and Angela Zielinski, DPT. Please remember that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. This is not medical advice, and this is just general discussion for educational purposes. Thank you. Enjoy. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Angela.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm so good. So good.
Great. Today we are going to talk about the Tonic Labyrinthine Reflex, or TLR.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that, Mary?
Oh, TLR. It's such kind of a mysterious reflex to so many people. Kind of has that kind of mystery and like admiration and fear around it. So
That's yes.
we can get into that as to why that is. But TLR. I used to kind of avoid it actually.
Me too. When Mary goes, Angela, should we do TLR? I went, oh. Because to me, it brings up all these feelings of like, it's so challenging. I didn't understand it for a while. And I understand it more now, which is good. But I just get a little resistant to it.
Understandably, because it's one that people kind of tiptoe around a little bit. So let's get into it and figure out why, and then we can maybe demystify it a little bit.
I like that, which is why we do this, Mary.
It is.
And this is such a big, important reflex that to tiptoe around it or to be uncomfortable with it doesn't serve our kids or the people that we work with. So
Not at all.
I have grown, and and we are gonna talk about it. So Mary made this our outline, and so here would be an example of something you would see that you would want to address the TLR reflex with. So here's our little story. A child has no problem going up a set of stairs, but goes down the stairs sideways or backwards. So to me, that means they don't look down when they're going downstairs, or they're afraid to look down to go downstairs.
Yep.
They resisted tummy time and did not crawl on all fours. When they lay down, their head is always tilted back.
Like when they lay down on their back, their head is tilted back is what I meant there. Mm-hmm.
They often need to lean on something when standing. So that might be a counter, that might be mom, that might be a toy. They have an unusual running pattern where their arms often come up into like chicken wings, or they flap, but they aren't doing like a propelling motion.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to avoid, or they really avoid sporting activities and wear out quickly when walking or running. I want to highlight the wearing out quickly. They often ask to be picked up, or they say I'm tired, or they don't want to go very far.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep. So that I thought that kind of summarized all the things that I see in kids when TLR is active and we assess it. Those are pretty common symptoms that I see in the older kids.
I agree. And I would say older kids, and in younger kids, I think of TLR with a head tilt or difficulty finding midline, because we often think of it as just a TNR, but often TLR is involved too, because as we know, they don't exist in isolation.
They do not.
And we don't often talk about that in classes or courses. So this is also, as I've grown and learned, it's become easier to address TLR now that I understand it often gets mixed up in other places.
And there's reasons for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So TLR has two patterns. It has flexion and extension. So it's a little unusual because most of the reflexes have kind of one pattern. But TLR has both the flexion and extension. So the forward flexion pattern, that's present in utero, and it's thought to be what allows baby to be in the fetal position in utero, curled up in a ball. And it's present at birth. And then the flexion pattern should integrate around 4 months of age.
And to me, the reason it should is because of the tummy time you're doing on mom and dad. You're snuggled up. You're supposed to be doing that chest time where they're laying on your chest and their heads, and you're supposed to be pushing through there. So
Mhm.
that time matters to help with that first emergence.
Mhm. And, babies, when they're laying on your chest, in a couple months, they start bringing their head up, right? And
Mhm.
then in their on floor time, they'll do the same thing. Around 2 months of age, they'll start, pushing up just a little bit off their tummy and looking around, and gradually they get higher and higher into spinal paress. That helps work against that flexion pattern so that it can integrate, because we don't need to be curled up into a ball once we hit the gravitational forces of Earth. And then the backward or extension pattern emerges at birth and integrates somewhere between 3 months and up to 2 to 3 years. So I find that pretty interesting, depending on whose stuff you read, and individual variation and what's going on. Like, oh, it could last up until 3 years of age. And I used to address TLR last because of that. But then I realized, as we're going to talk about, that if it lasts that long, it's usually because the brain's holding on to it because it needs it for something.
Yes.
So if we eliminate the reason that they need it, then it will quit hanging on. So when babies are born, immediately they come into this gravity laden environment that is the earth, and TLR provides the baby with a way to handle that, to deal with it before they have head control. So they tilt the head back and their body extends, and then they tilt their head forward and their body flexes. So it provides them a way of movement until they have the head control and postural control to deal with all the gravity about us. So there is an overlap with how TLR develops, with this like rapid development of head control, rolling, kind of the early anti-gravity movements that babies do. And TLR should gradually give way to more mature postural reactions like writing.
I think that that's an important note of it should gradually give way to more mature patterns.
Yes.
But our conversations, Mary, about if you've never activated a reflex correctly, it will not integrate. What does
Yeah.
it mean clinically when TLR's responses are absent early?
Mm. So, well, we were kind of just pointing in that didn't
Yeah.
ever merge. Usually, then we're looking at concerns about the central nervous system, which basically the brain and spinal cord, or motor pathway compromise. So, is there some kind of lesion on the brain? Is there cerebral palsy? Was there some kind of brain injury in utero? I mean, those things happen, unfortunately. So clinically, if there is no TLR response in the first couple months of life, there's something going on. And, it takes some investigating to figure that out. Like, usually their TLR is super duper active in both directions, is what I find. And extension seems to be the one that most kids seem to get stuck in, unless they're very fearful. And then they tend to be babies who roll up all the time, right? Because that's safe. So our autonomic
Mhm.
nervous system is like, no, no, let's go into safety. You will curl up into a ball. All right. So thinking about, what does TLR do for the baby?
It helps a lot with head control. It helps a lot with lifting your head early. It helps with establishing midline. It also helps with regulation of flexion extension, which is a pretty tough concept for babies to start learning.
Can you speak more about that? What does that look like? A regulation of flexion extension?
That looks like a baby who can, when they're on their backs, they can move their arms and legs and like spontaneous movements. They can bring their knees up. It would be a baby who can eventually put like their feet to their mouth. So being able to do foot to mouth is a good sign that TLR is making its way through and not being stuck in extension. And then on your tummy, it looks like a baby who can start pushing through their arms and exploring with their arms and knees and feet all touching the surface, because some babies will just throw their heads back and their arms aren't really weight bearing. They're just kind of there for show. And sometimes you can weight bear through your arms, but your pelvis is coming up. And sometimes it gets mixed with Landau, so it depends on like what age are you seeing this.
Mhm,
But being able to access movement in a variety of ways. That's what I
mhm.
think of.
Yeah, no, that is a great explanation. Um, I worked with a kiddo who they were still they were under a year old, but the only way they rolled was almost to flip themselves. So when the parent described it to me, they were going into extension, and that very quick extension was like flipping them over because they didn't have the ability to roll. They were so stuck in extension. Have you seen that before? She's nodding. Yeah.
Yes, yes, because they, instead of pushing and doing it with multiple pieces, you learn that your head is heavy, and if you just do it fast enough, you can get where you need to go. So,
Mhm,
because babies are smart and, like, bodies wanna move, but when you lead with extension, a lot of people think of that as just Moro, like, they'll say you're stuck in Moro for extension, but in my experience, it's often more TLR and extension
yes.
because of the lack of regulation, not because of this quote, like you said, like developmental Moro piece. So in my opinion, sometimes it's both Moro and TLR, but rarely is it ever just quote Moro.
Mhm. Well, and that's something I see in these videos that are posted online all the time. Somebody will tilt a kid's head back and their arms come up and they're like, see, that's Moro. But the arms are coming straight up. Like I'm holding because you can't see me, like I'm holding my arms up because somebody's, holding me up from my wallet. So my hands are straight up, whereas Moro is out from the body. There's a full opening and extension, and the arms are out like 45 degrees. So when you tilt a kid's head back and their arms come up, like we're playing stick 'em up, that's actually TLR. And those two things do get confused quite often. How about the way that it impacts muscle tone and core strength? Since you work with so many babies, maybe you could speak to this.
This is an interesting one because before I really understood TLR, people would say this and I didn't really understand. I was one of those kind of like smile and nods. So TLR helps with organizing muscle tone and organizing like your trunk and the tone of your trunk and your core and your postures. And so TLR, if depending on how TLR presents, sometimes there's those babies who, when they're on their backs, instead of rolling, they want to sit straight up and they do like a crunch and they kind of they get stuck and they get red and they don't want to roll. They're just trying to plank and go straight up, but on their backs. And that can often be because of TLR in my experience. So it can have increased tone for those ab muscles, but then it also can, if it's not integrated, it can be the opposite too, where it's a little bit hard to stay sitting. So you've got that C back and you're just a little unsteady. Like you're always just on the verge of falling, which is completely typical and normal as you're learning to sit. But if you've got TLR on board, you can start to learn a little quicker of like, oh, if I go this way, I should actually come back this way. Or you can play, like you said, with like the writing reactions come on a little bit sooner so that your sitting becomes more and more mature. Whereas if TLR isn't as integrated, it takes longer for your body to respond to lack of stability and being upright.
Yeah, and that C back, the curve back when babies sit, that baby's in flexion and they can't extend their trunk and can't straighten that back up, and that should happen naturally. That's not something that has to be taught. So the observational skills are really important here to figure out what's going on with the kiddo. Why aren't they getting up into sitting? Why do they always like babies who like will kind of lean while they sit, like they have one hand down all the time? They're like trying to negotiate gravity, but they don't have the postural control to do that. So they're stabilizing on something. That can also be a sign that TLR is still active.
What does it look like in older kids, Mary, for their postures?
Oh, I used to say, because I worked at high schools primarily as a teacher, I could sit out on campus and tell you every kid that had an active TLR, because the boys would walk along with their hands in their pockets and their heads down. So they were stabilizing while they were walking, and their heads were always down. They could not look up while they were walking. It had to be down. And they'd come into class and they'd put their hoodies on, but they're always looking down. And they always had a curved back. And I'd look around the room and I'd be like, and you, like in my head, you can just see the posture. Um, so yeah, kids who fatigue a lot, who just don't want to be out in PE, avoid it. I mean, there's lots of reasons why kids don't like PE in high school, but that's one of them. They get tired really quickly when they walk or run. Yeah. And even sitting in a chair in class, we talked about this during the episode we did on cognition, the postural control to be able to hold myself up in a seat in class. You see that a lot in older kids and not just high schoolers, but school age kids. It's really tiring. You might always also see kids too, like when they're sleeping. Do they sleep kind of in fetal position? Do they sleep with their head tilted back? A parent told me that the other day on a consultation, that their kiddos, when they go in to check on them, their head is always tilted back and their arms are always up. I'm like, oh, well, that's TLR. Yeah, so they're sleeping in extension. So I've seen both. I've seen the kids who sleep in fetal position and the kids who sleep in extension. So those are some examples of that as well. So I think we talked about like functionally, we talked about posture and endurance for sitting, balance and coordination for play and sports. TLR is really involved in the vestibular system. So yes, so TLR involves head movement, right? So up and down head movement. And I don't think we mentioned this, but it's very involved in the birth process because it helps babies get through the birth canal, kind of doing the inchworm, right? They go flexion, extension, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, and helps them wiggle through the birth canal. And while they're doing that, all that head movement is activating those semicircular canals. So when they're in those patterns of flexion and extension with the head movement, we're stimulating the vestibular system, and also through proprioception, like all of the activation of the proprioceptors and the whole trunk and neck. And the proprioceptors are very, very dense in the neck because there's so many muscles that hold this crazy big old head of ours up. So you get lots of dense proprioceptors there. So when we have head movement up and down or side to side, it activates all those proprioceptors, which then stimulate the vestibular system. So super involved in vestibular function. And it's one of the reasons, like one of the tests for TLR is for kids to come up on their toes and then go down and do a squat. Like what happens when we test them in gravity, and then also to stand straight up and look up at the ceiling and close their eyes. That's another test for TLR. And then to look down and close their eyes and see what happens. Are they swaying? And that's another indicator of TLR. So super involved in vestibular, auditory processing and attention via through the root of postural and vestibular foundation. So auditory processing, which we've discussed at length in previous episodes, is dependent on strong postural and vestibular foundations. And TLR is super involved in that as well.
I don't think you mentioned the visual tracking. We've talked about this before, and we've consulted of when there's difficulty with holding eye gaze or your eye jumps, which is saccades, when you're trying to visually track or with head movement. TLR helps with gaze stabilization. And I know you know more, so tell me more, Mary.
So vertical eye movements are more associated with TLR, and that would be the mesencephalon, top of the brainstem. It's also called the midbrain there. So it is certainly involved in gaze stabilization. And so vertical eye movement is more TLR. Horizontal movement would be more ATNR and STNR. But yes, it is certainly involved in vision and our vestibular ocular reflex and head rating. And those things all get tied together because, once again, reflexes do not work in isolation, which we will repeat in every single episode, probably.
Yeah.
So TLR is a brainstem-mediated primitive reflex, meaning it's present at birth, and it is informed by the otoliths and other vestibular receptors in the inner ear, like semicircular canals. We mentioned that change in head position or body position is detected by those and then communicated to the vestibular nuclei in the brainstem and also to the cerebellum. So we get lots of activation in various parts of the brain from that TLR. And I think you alluded to this earlier, that integration of TLR helps develop cortical control. Cortical control meaning the cortex, so the higher part of the brain, of the lower areas of the brain. So when TLR remains active, it's going to pull more energy down into that brainstem, and we're not getting the inhibition that happens in a positive term from the higher parts of the brain, like, oh, you don't need to do that anymore. We've got these more advanced patterns that we could work with. And as long as TLR is active, it's like, no, I like where we are right now. Thanks. And TLR is an all or nothing response. So when babies go into flexion, they go into flexion. When they go into extension, they go into extension. It's a whole body kind of response because the legs are involved too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
It's head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right?
right? Toes and arms. So everything is involved in TLR. So like in extension, the legs will straighten and the feet will straighten. So it's one of, as we talked in our toe walking episodes, TLR is often involved in toe walking as well, because the kiddo is stuck in extension. And one of the ways you differentiate is to look at what's going on with the head and the arms when they're on toes. If their arms come up when they're on toes or their head goes back, probably more TLR than trunk extension. So
It's hard too because TLR is and STNR STNR is often dependent on TLR integrating because TLR is supposed to go first. And so sometimes babies having difficulty getting their knees under them to start with quadruped crawling or creeping. That can TLR can play a role in that because if you're all or nothing, you want to stay in extension. So then it's hard to get STNR to come on to help with that moving to all fours.
And so what's easier than being in all fours? Where could we stay in extension all the time? So I could just skip crawling because I can't get out of extension to get into STNR. And somebody sent me a video of a kid the other day, and every time they went into STNR, their legs would shoot out behind them. I think you just described that earlier when we were chatting, right? And you're like, oh, look at little TLR there. So they're trying to get their arms involved and their head. And when they lift up their head and STNR, the legs are like, whoop, and go out from under them and straighten out. So we describe that for you so it helps you develop kind of this observational lens that when you're looking at kids or looking at your own child, that it helps you kind of differentiate what might be involved with what's going on with them. And TLR is super involved with Lando too. So let's see, where else do we need to go? We talked a little bit about the vestibular.
Do you want to tell me more? Because this is all really good stuff that I wouldn't tell people. So teach me, Mary. Teach me about TLR and the vestibular system. Tell me about this mysterious reflex that I'm always learning more about and have feelings about.
Well, I mean, I think we did a pretty good job of discussing it. It's that the sensors in the ears pick up the change in movement, and that activation by head position is what underlies the TLR response. So this constant head movement driven flexion extension pattern provides our central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, really strong information about where we are in space. And it feeds our vestibular and our proprioceptive systems and our visual system. But if it gets stuck, then we get this kind of immature awareness of where we are, and we don't get to choose the way which we move our bodies. Our body just moves for us. And there can be a lot of stabilization that needs to happen. And I think I used this story before, but I was in a classroom. I was a guest teacher in somebody else's classroom. This was a first grade classroom, and this little guy just could not sit on the floor. He kept like throwing himself down on his belly. I felt so bad for him. He'd be like, I sorry. And then he'd try and sit up again. Couldn't sit crisscross applesauce. He was sitting with his knees under him. But then he would throw himself down on his belly again. And at the time, I thought it was more STNR, but today I'm like, nah, that was TLR. Yeah. Preventing STNR from fully coming so he couldn't segment his body because he was an extension all the time.
Yeah, and it's hard because it's not just one thing, right? Like it's both. And I think this big bad TLR is what I'm going to call it, is what I was telling Mary was I got really frustrated when I first started learning about reflex integration because in classes, you always run out of time and they would leave TLR for the end and they would rush through it. And then they would say this, they would say, you don't have to worry about TLR because once you integrate everything else, TLR just comes. And I was like, I
Uh,
don't.
uh,
And so I would just say, and smile again, smile and nod. And then in clinic, I would come up against this lack of understanding because TLR actually affects a lot of reflexes, and a lot of reflexes affect TLR. So sometimes I was in this loop of I can't get, let's say, ATNR and STNR to integrate because I'm struggling with TLR, but I can't get TLR until I get STNR and ATNR. And it's this tough loop. And this podcast is helping me realize is nobody said to me, hey, Angela, if you improve proprioception and vestibular function through things like embrace and squeeze, through things like figure eights, through things like smaller reflexes in my head is what I call smaller reflexes like Babkin and Babinski, where it's more localized. If I can help the proprioceptive system and help the body find itself, then TLR is more likely to integrate because it's looking for safety, it's looking for input,
mhm.
and that sometimes you have to move forward and backwards and it's not linear.
Yes. Oh, gosh, we could stay there for a while. So this idea that you can just work through a reflex until it's integrated doesn't always work. Because again, let's say it together, shall we? Nothing works in isolation.
That's right.
Yeah. So like even with hands grasp, right? So we do Palmer, which is the initial grasp. And then we start working on grasp sequence, which is Robinson's. And then all of a sudden we'll get kind of stuck at that like level 4, like basal ganglia, where the hand is kind of cupped, right?
Mhm.
And then kids get kind of stuck there. They can't like isolate their fingers. They still have a poor grasp. Well, why is that? I realize this is a different reflex, but it's a good one to make a point. Well, in order to really use our hands independently, our fingers independently, we have to have good postural control and good arm control. And if we have reflexes that are still active, that prevent us from using our arms however we choose to. TLR would be one of those. STNR, ATNR, hand supporting, hands pulling or pull to sit. Then we won't have that ability to use his arms freely. And so that grasp is never going to fully mature. So sometimes I start Palmer, Robinson's hands grasp, and then I will pause and we'll do all these other things and then we'll come back to it. Actually, this was just a realization I had a few months ago. So none of us have it all down pat. We're constantly learning, constantly reevaluating. Like, why isn't this integrating? And one day I just went, oh, it was kind of just like, oh, there's this other thing in the way. So same thing with TLR. Sometimes it, particularly with older kids, you always have to ask the question, why? Why is TLR still present? What is the brain getting by holding on to it? What does it need? If reflexes are holding on, it's because we have a compensation pattern. We're trying to make up for something. What is it? And TLR, I think most of the time, it's postural instability. Angela's not speaking, but she's shaking.
I agree. Sorry, I agree. Yes, postural and like asymmetry, especially because when you're getting asymmetrical inputs, it's difficult to then find your midline, which TLR helps so much with.
Right. And so that would be like ATNR. If we have active ATNR, we are asymmetrical. And so the brain's like, oh, no, that's not going to work. So then we like put this extra emphasis into stabilizing our trunk so that we can have some postural stability. And the big one for that would be TLR, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing that we always have to consider when we're looking at some of these reflexes, at least, is like, why is it still there? With STNR, I think STNR stays present because other things are missing that allowed it to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And TLR seems to be kind of this unicorn that it gets held onto much longer, like up to 3 years of age. But why? Why would it be active that long? What is the brain trying to accomplish? Just like we said in the emotional regulation one, the behavior always tells you something. It's a form of communication. To me, reflexes are a form of communication. The brain's trying to tell a story. So what story does TLR tell us? Postural instability, usually vestibular proprioceptive. Mm-hmm.
So, Mary, you know what I find interesting when you just asked that question and we were talking before the podcast about different parts of the nervous system was I find that TLR stays active a lot with kids who've had birth trauma or had a challenging birth or breech births. And it's this fascinating link between emotions and traumatic events or this ability to survive. So you survived, and so your body thinks that TLR is part of your survival. So it hangs on to it. And one of the ways that I've actually found to really help that process or help the body integrate TLR, and to see what's actually happening with TLR is to take kids into the water. So we go to the water, we have a fun swim session with mom or dad, and we're all in there together. And I help them get into a very supportive TLR float on my body. So I can get them higher on my chest and they can relax and feel safe. And so when I'm rolling them and get them into a TLR float, what I've had happen is like they'll go into ATNR on one side. And so if we sit there and we stay safe, then their body can relax and then they'll come to midline. Or I've also had it happen where we go into TLR float and they just start crying, Mary, and they are just releasing all of these emotions, and we give them back to mom to co-regulate. And then after that moment, everything else just starts to fall into place. And they do so well. And it's this fascinating piece that you've been teaching me so much about the vagus nerve and how it interacts with safety and reflexes. And I just see it a lot with this TLR process and in the water. So
That's fascinating. And you've read The Body Keeps the Score? Mm.
yes.
Sylvana Cook's work, for those of you listening, uh, seminal work on trauma and the body and how we process trauma and store it in our body. Life changing for me personally. But if we think about these infants who had these traumatic births, they're holding the memory of that traumatic birth in their body, perhaps. So when we're in water, what does that feel like? Being in utero, and they're safe and secure. And so when it's comforting and the brain can be like, oh, I remember this time when I was in the water and that was pretty cool. I was safe and mom is there, right? And then we have this big emotional release. The nervous system is releasing that. And emotional responses are part of our autonomic nervous system. So crying can, I mean, how many of us as adults are just like, I need to have a good cry. So I'm just going to go roll up in a ball on my bed and cry it out. And then I'll come back and problem solve later. It's a form of release when we get so pent up. What does a 2-year-old do when they get frustrated? They start crying, you co-regulate, and then they come back. It's like, okay, we're okay now. I suspect that's part of what you're seeing in the water. And then what else do we get in the water?
Proprioception. So much proprioception, right?
Because water is heavy and it surrounds the body and it provides simultaneous proprioception to the whole body. So I really like this kind of like this little digression that we did though, because it's such an interesting way of looking at reflexes. And you said you put them on their back, and I assume that's what TLR float is. They're on their back, yes. And then sometimes they go into ATNR.
Yes.
What do you think about that? How do you explain that?
Well, at first, the first time it happened, I was like, uh, I didn't see that, right? That wasn't, no. And then I just kept seeing it. And it tends to show up with kids who had, quote, a diagnosis of torticollis, to be honest. And so what I make of that is that they are TLR and ATNR, what fires together, wires together. And in torticollis, you often have a head tilt and then a rotation. And so babies are compensating to move in a certain direction. And so their body thinks that they're supposed to be working together. And maybe it thinks it's supposed to be working together because that's how they survived to get out of the birth canal. Maybe they had to be rotated and pulled all at the same time. Or maybe they had a comfortable spot in utero, and then you have a C-section, and maybe it just didn't unwind because it didn't get the opportunity to unwind, is kind of my thoughts around it. And so when they go into this proprioceptive environment, safety, and water-like utero, it allows the body the opportunity to like show me what it's doing and reset the system. Like, oh, body, I could show you a different way. Let's work together. And then when we do it again, each time the body starts to respond more and more correctly. And then you see changes in other areas of development and movement and reflexes as well.
You know what other really important thing we take out of the mix of water? Gravity.
Ah, yes. I didn't even think about that. Gravity. You're right.
And Isabel Renaud of MNRI, she teaches aquatic courses too. Yeah,
She does.
yeah. I'm a terrible swimmer, probably because my reflexes were active till I was almost 40. So I have not taken the aquatic classes because it doesn't seem like a good fit for me.
That's fair. That's so. And the other thing, water. I actually like to ask people who have kids who like the water is kids who can swim underwater in a line versus kids STNR, right? And now that we're talking about it, a little bit of TLR as well. But there are, if you can swim in a straight line under the water, but you can't swim and bring your head out of the water, that is a reflex integration.
Well, when we're swimming underwater, we can keep our body in flexion, and then we can just use our arms to move forward. So we don't have to, like when we're on top of the water, we actually have to get like the movement of the pelvis, and our arms have and legs all have to work independently, and our head has to come up. It's far more complex to swim on top of the water than under the water.
Yes. One of my favorite ways to get reflex integration in the wild is for kids to do swim classes and to explore movement in the water because it helps bodies a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
And that's often something I see. A lot of my kids are in my clients are in swim classes, and I'll get these updated videos as we move through the reflex process of them improving and improving and improving, not because of necessarily what's going on in the swim class, but suddenly they were able to do strokes, and suddenly they were able to put their face in the water and not freak out, or they were able to kick finally independently as we did cross flexion.
yeah.
Well, thanks for that discussion.
Yes, it's fun to talk about different parts and again, TLR being this mysterious reflex that no one talks about. Because of my frustration with classes and, like, trying this and trying that for TLR, not quite understanding it, and people a lot of classes just being like, "Don't worry about it, it will come." When we were prepping for this, I asked Mary, "What have you found to be helpful with TLR?" Besides because my experience with reflex integration is a lot of MNRI. I'm very MNRI heavy because that's what has helped me in my own body, and that is the most classes I've taken. I've taken other classes, but to be honest, they don't really address reflex integration as well as I would like them to. I'm often left wanting more. But I also haven't taken Dr. Darren's class. So I haven't taken as much RMT as Mary. So Mary, what strategies do you use to help with TLR? Just so people know that there are options.
So I use kind of a variety of strategies. So I do use some rocking motions from RMT. And when I say RMTI, that's because there are two different RMTs. There's BRMT from Canada, that's Blomberg's RMT, and there's RMTI, the Movement Training International, and that's Moira Dempsey's. That kind of the two split some time ago. So that's the differentiation. They have kind of very similar, you know, but there's some divergence there. So that's why I always specify that because I trained under Moira directly. All right, so there's one. It's supine passive rocking, where you're like pushing on their feet that are flexed. I think Darren calls it plantar rocking, and that helps that head movement and the movement of the body and the flexion of the foot. All of that movement is a very gentle way, and then you can turn them over into prone position, flex the feet so the toes are down, and rock them in that position passively. There's an active version of that. There's knees bent rocking from RMTI, where they're laying on their back, knees are bent, and you're pulling or pulling from underneath the knees or on top of them to rock them as well. So that gets movement of the pelvis plus the knees are up. So we're in a bit of flexion and we get the head movement. So that's some of them. And we have like from MNRI do the prone. So they're like, you call that little mouse, don't you? When
You
they're
call that little mouse. Yep.
they're on their they're in prone with their knees under them. Am I describing that well? Like in fetal position, right? But prone.
Or your child's pose in yoga.
Oh, yes, thank you, child's pose. But usually the arms are kind of under them, not like out behind them. Like, and then there's an isometric portion to that where isometric means that you give a light pressure and they push against you. That's isometric. And then hand under the head and they push down. And then same thing for supine. They're laying down straight out and they lift their head up into the hand and back with a little isometric pressure. I also have a couple of activities that I use on an exercise ball. So in one of them, they're laying on the exercise ball and they're holding another ball in their hand, so their arms are extended. So they're stabilizing themselves on the ground with their feet, and then they're on the ball and they're holding a ball, and they throw the ball like against a wall. It bounces and then they catch it. So they're in extension, but they're using their arms independently from their trunk and keeping their head up. And then I do that backwards. So like they're on the ball and they have to extend completely backwards on the ball. So they're like completely open, kind of like a Moro position. And then they come up with the ball in their hands to sitting, and then they throw it. So we're going flexion, extension, and then there's like under overs. You see those on Instagram all the time. Those are great. So they're holding a ball and they look up and fully extend and tap against the wall, and then they bring it down, fully flex and like bring it between their legs to the wall. And so up and down. So under overs. What else? Airplanes is one. Cannonballs are one. Those are more advanced. But I always start with the real passive stuff, like the rocking is always how I use as an entry point because it's so gentle and it helps get things moving. And if kids are in tendon guard, if they're super tight, which can be because TLR has been active for so long in extension, they're just so locked up. You have to kind of release that, right? And release all that from the fascia. And the rocking motions will do that like in minutes, which is really delightful. So that was a lot, but that's kind of my pathway that I go through. And like we said before, sometimes I start TLR and then I have to do some other things and come back to it later, like 18R and STNR. TLR and Landau are very tightly associated because of that extension pattern. So sometimes I work on those together. Yeah. What about you, Miss Angela?
Yeah. Since I work more with younger kids, a lot the rocking parts I've done, but those portions where you have to do like isometrics or follow directions,
Mm-hmm.
challenging and not not really possible. So a lot of like trying to track a toy up and down, that can be helpful when they're sitting with a parent. A lot of helping them feel safe in their bodies, and a lot of proprioception combined with like the little mouse position, a lot of proprioceptive work in position so that they can find their body, and then they tend to progress from there.
So I think one of the other reflexes that we don't really, or the two reflexes we don't really talk about, we haven't talked about in relationship to TLR, and then we're going to have to wrap it up here, is spinal parese and spinal galant.
Ah, yes. Our spinal friends.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So spinal parese is the, kind of the cobra-esque position where babies are prone on their bellies. Arms are down, forearms are down, and they start to push up and look around the world, right? So we're dividing that body, top and bottom, when they come up like that, and and which means the whole body can't flex or extend, right? So we're flexing our back muscles, but our legs are staying straight. So we're working against that TLR pattern. And so that one gets overlooked a lot. And I will say that that's another one that I didn't do a lot of work with until the last couple of years. Because it's not taught as much as spinal galant. It really gets left out of a lot of work, particularly the stuff you see propagated online so much. Spinal parese isn't really talked about so much, but it is. If I had to choose like one reflex of tummy time, it's parese.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then galant and parese really are kind of tied together very much so. Galant provides that lateral flexion for crawling and rolling. And so if we can't roll because we're in flexion all the time, then we're not going to be able to fully develop and integrate galant either. So if you have a kid who still has galant active, I'd probably poke around in TLR as well. And parese, because they're all tied together. Because again, no reflex works in isolation. So it is a little, we've talked about this before about being a bit of a detective as to what's going on. How do I know where to work? How do I know where to start? And then how do I know when I'm done? And TLR is a tricky one because it's so tied together with so many other reflexes and with postural stability. and the vestibular system. So if we have an underdeveloped vestibular system, we probably also will retain the TLR. So sometimes doing vestibular training, vestibular rehab can help the TLR also integrate. Again, the body tells a story. So the brain's trying to tell us something. What is it trying to tell us? And that kind of helps inform our decision making.
I think this is why people don't talk about TLRs because it's so complicated and it's so tied up in so many other things that it's easier to not it's such a long conversation that if you're trying to get in 20 reflexes in a 4-day class, you can't spend the time discussing it as deeply, and it's confusing, and it's easier just to say it will come because it's true on some level that it will come, but it's not that straightforward.
And I will say the more I work with it, the less complicated I think it is. That this detective lens, like, oh, that's extension. Why? Why are we still in extension? What do we need from that? What purpose is it serving us? And then how do we allow the brain to be like, oh, I don't need that pattern anymore? And then understanding the interplay, that concept that reflexes, what did you say? What fires together, wires together? That wasn't taught to me until just a few years ago, honestly. So I've been practicing all these years without this idea that these could get intertwined together and the brain will perceive them as one unit. Like Babinski and plantar, that happens all the time, even though those merge together naturally at some point in our development, but that's not the way they're taught to us. So this idea that our brain is like, I think of a little bit like hoarding, like, okay, I need this and I need that and I need that. And I'm never letting them go because these are the things that are safe for me. And these are the things that kept me safe and you can't take them away from me. And sometimes when you try, if you're poking around the thing too early, it's going to cause the nervous system to kind of freak out. Don't take that from me. I need that right now. Okay. Let me think about why you still need that then. What else could we address to help your brain feel safe and address this underlying need? And then when we work on it, it'll be okay. You're doing that by taking them in the water. That is never something I'm going to do. So we're going to find, otherwise you're going to have to take me out of fight or flight. So, so there's other ways that we can get about that. Anything else before we say goodbye to our loyal listeners?
Thank you to everyone listening. If you have follow-up questions on this episode, email Mary at
oh, you're so funny. Yeah. You can find her at Dr. Angela. No,
no, I'm just kidding. No, this was super helpful. I always like doing these conversations and being willing to talk about it so that people know that it's not linear, that there's always more to learn, and that it's not a scary topic once you learn more and you're willing to learn more about it, I think. What about you, Mary?
Yes, like I said, the more I work with it, the less scary it is. And that being willing to be present and observe and notice is so important in this work. And always considering, what's the behavior trying to tell us? What's the brain trying to tell us? Is there an emotional component to this? Where could this come from? Babies remember what happened in utero. Babies remember what happened during birth. And I'm not saying that to like scare people or make moms feel guilty, like, oh, we had a terrible birth, it's my fault. Because moms feel that way anyway, and it's not your fault. It is not your fault. So these things can be unwound. The older the child is, the longer it takes to unwind them, though. I don't think we said that because those compensation patterns have been in place for a really long time. And so allowing the brain to see that there's another way of being when they've been holding compensation patterns for 8, 9, 10 years takes more time than in these littles that Angela's working with most of the time when they may still be within their developmental window. And the brain's like, cool, I don't need that anymore. Thanks for letting me know. But a 10-year-old brain will be like, oh no, I've needed that for 10 years and you're going to have to really convince me. So consider that as well. There are really no quick fixes in this work. They take time and patience and diligence and being careful and a little bit methodical sometimes. I know Angela and I have different styles in that. I am a pretty methodical practitioner. But with this reflex in particular with older kids, it really does take some kind of step-by-step kind of scaffolding to allow the brain to be like, oh, thank goodness, I don't need to do that anymore. I didn't know. Yeah, those are my closing thoughts.
Yeah, I like that. And I'd like to do just a quick summary to make sure I understood it, Mary, and for our listeners. TLR is a big component in posture. It's a big component in endurance. It's a big component in our vestibular system, in our vision system, and also plays a role in our auditory system because of the posture. And it can be an underlying factor if we're looking at difficulty with clumsiness, or an underlying factor if you're having difficulty with physical fatigue.
Climbing, walking up and down stairs, sitting in class, being able to sit still might be another one because it's uncomfortable to segment our body when we're in extension, slumping over a lot. Yeah, all of those are. It's also one that's really common in dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia also. So, yeah, I think you understood it really well.
Well, thanks. Thanks for teaching me, Mary. And all of this, and to bring it back to, because you're our brain, you teach us about the brain, that if you have a TLR that's constantly active, it's hard to have a clear pathway to the higher levels of the brain. So, so your limbic system and your brainstem tends to
rule the day,
which means difficulty with emotional regulation, right?
Emotional regulation, cortical functions, so speech, language, communication, academic learning, those are all cortical functions, right? So yes, as with all primitive reflexes, if they are still active, that is draining energy in the brain. I'm simplifying that tremendously into the brainstem. We're not reaching up into those cortical areas, the higher part, the cortices, for those higher level, problem solving, analysis, working memory, all the executive functioning pieces, planning, organizing, all of that as well. That is correct.
Okay. Awesome. But we have tools and we're working through it. And this is just one little link to help everybody in different ways. So
this one's a big link, I think.
One big link in our journey to
one small reflex for man, one giant link for mankind.
All right. Thank you very much, Mary. Post-edit note from Angela. I just want to say thank you to everyone for listening, and to please remember that I am trained in a lot of different modalities. I am trained to take children in the water, and that we should always put children's safety as the number one priority. And so this conversation today was to inspire people to learn more, to take classes, and to remember to always keep children safe, no matter what type of intervention you're doing. You can email us at brainsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com. You can find Mary at her website, brain-works.org, or on Facebook with her Facebook Reflex Integration groups. If you would like that information, please check our show notes. And you can find Angela at angelapt.com or rainbowdragonbooks.com. Thanks for listening.